The example that I was given was you start with a chatbot, and we can call it GPT-4 or GPT-29 or whatever it is. And in the course of answering a prompt, like how do I start a successful online business with minimal effort, it comes up with a clever response, which is basically a shell script that the user can paste into their terminal and run. The script then starts doing all kinds of operations that the human didn't intend, but that makes sense to the AI, right? It starts copying itself to a bunch of different web servers, putting a bunch of websites offering online services that can make money, maybe automatically trading in the stock market or something. And it might just go all the way to noticing all these opportunities to copy itself into a whole bunch of different devices that aren't secure. Because I think we probably both agree the internet's not the most secure place in the world. Yes, your banks and governments are more secure than social media websites or whatever it is, but it's still not the most secure. And so then suddenly, because of this, hours later, humanity realizes what's going on, and we sort of have the coordination problem where there's a botnet connected to billions of devices, and it escalated really quickly into this like super intelligence machine. What of that do you think is implausible, would break down in your mind in that scenario?
So there's two key implausible elements to that scenario. One is the idea is that there's a bunch of untapped resources that you could just grab easy because nobody's doing much with them, and they're just all for the grabbing.
Just like servers or whatever it is?
Right. And the other is that there's this big opportunity for starting to do self-improvement that is also untapped. So generally, when you have an image of a sudden burst, what you have is image of some untapped resources that are just sitting and waiting to be grabbed. So if you think about Columbus and the New World, you think about the Europeans, all this advanced technology, and there's this whole world that they could conquer, except they don't know about it. And suddenly they learn about it, and suddenly they can just burst out and grab all this resources, which from their point of view is relatively easy to grab, but they just didn't know about it, right? So that's a scenario of some burst through of possibilities, right? That's what you're trying to construct when you're trying to construct one of these sudden burst scenarios. And so in this story, there's one of the bursts is the idea that there's all this computing hardware out there that's just very useful and hardly defended, and you could just grab it. Now, the problem is that in our world, if that's true, there's all these people who would want to be grabbing it and using it. And, this new thing would have to be fighting against them. That is, there's a world of people who are trying to protect their stuff and a world of people trying to grab things. And we might say the world today is that world. And so there's no easy move to make a big win unless you have a big advantage somehow. So that's when we think about military technology. We look, there's all these nations next to each other. They build up their militaries based on the perceived threats of their neighbors and their budgets. And we think, given if they're all correct about the rough, capabilities of the various kinds of military hardware and soldiers and everything, then they'll be in an equilibrium where nobody gets taken over because they've all roughly guessed correctly the intentions and capabilities of their neighbors. But if suddenly one nation were to have a new technology, or some, new, just even social ability to coordinate that nobody expected, then they might surprise their neighbors. And then suddenly there'd be an invasion and a war, and then who knows what would happen because you've got a shock, a change. So if you're going to try to make a dramatic change scenario in a world where things are competing, you have to come up with a surprise. So, you might say GPT or large language models are a surprise at the moment. So there was a world of search engines and Google was at the top. And then, hey, a surprise new tech. And now Google's dominance is now in question because they didn't anticipate this shock to the world of competition, and then they've got to deal with it, right? So in the scenario you had, there were these two shocks that are postulated. One is that there's all this computer hardware out there, and that if you can just be a little bit smarter than we are now, suddenly you can just grab it all. Even though, of course, they were all anticipating that and trying to protect themselves, and, maybe there's only so much you can do with all of it, but that's one part. And the other part was just this idea that this machine, suddenly decides, what would happen if I improve myself? As if they weren't doing that now. But in fact, my understanding is AI researchers are constantly trying, what would happen if we had this thing try to improve itself? And the reason why that's not a major feature in most systems is it just doesn't work that well. When they try it, it just doesn't succeed. So you have to be postulating that somehow this new system found a way to actually make that work much better than the previous attempts have, right? This thing tried to improve itself, and somehow the way it tried to improve itself, that was a big winner.